Okay. This review, that girl, Palladian by Elizabeth Taylor. Not that Elizabeth Taylor, the other Elizabeth Taylor, the author, not the actress. This is a book you probably haven't heard about, but it's a good one. I like it. More. Oh, I can't wait for lunch. I'm making a burrito bowl. Let's dive in. Elizabeth Taylor. I enjoy Elizabeth Taylor's writing. Haven't read her in quite some time, in a few years, but I really enjoy her writing. She's one of those 20th century English authors that just nail like things like domestic fiction or that interwar period fiction that I think is just so good. Like if you're a fan of Barbara Pym, you'll also probably get along with Elizabeth Taylor. I need to read more Barbara Pym. I've only read one, and that was Excellent Women, which was excellent. It was hilarious. This is for all of those who are a fan of Jane Eyre-esque novels. Is it time we move through or space? So in Palladian, again, it's a Jane Eyre-esque novel. And burping. It's not a retelling because the main character, Cassandra Dashwood, is very aware that her current situation in life is paralleling Jane Eyre. And so it's like you're getting a novel within a novel. Maybe it's a little Inception, but it's not a retelling. It has its own nuances that still make this feel like you're reading something different. You're not reading, it's not, one of those retellings where they take one of the characters out of the story of a classic and tell it from a different angle. That's not what this is. So she goes to Cropthorne Manor instead of Thorn Hall. She goes to Cropthorne Manor again to serve as a governess for a girl named Sophie. She quickly falls for her employer, the melancholy Mr. Marion Van Berg, and the novel explores like these other dysfunctional characters who are also Marion's relations. So again, Taylor isn't hiding that this is heavily influenced by Jane Eyre, and I quote, she knew that Jane Eyre had answered up better than that to her Mr. Rochester. She uses this as an element of the story. Again, like I said, it's like you're getting a novel within a novel. And again, Cassandra is I feel like I have to burp again. Cassandra is very well aware that she is paralleling Jane in Jane Eyre's story. Don't you think truth is stranger than fiction, Miss Dashwood? However, there is more realism in Cassandra's story, maybe versus this gothic mysticism, perhaps. There's almost something, you know what it's like with the Victorian Gothic literature. There are things, there may be elements of like the paranormal, perhaps. We don't get that here. So there's more realism in this story. And yes, life can seem unreal at times, but there is this, here you get the sense of disillusionment, perhaps. And even though Cassandra does fall in love with Marion, there is something flat about the development of this relationship. And so in a sense, and that again, that was done intentionally, there is something here, and perhaps it's more realistic with how some relationships can go. You're not always, you can be swept away on your feet very quickly, but perhaps, reality can sink in kind of quickly, right? It's not romanticized. That's the word. The scene somehow missed being quite so idyllic as it would have looked as the tailpiece of an old-fashioned love story. Interestingly enough, Palladian also reminded me of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I wouldn't be surprised, again, if Elizabeth Taylor was inspired by it. So this was actually published 8 years after Rebecca, so it was published in 1946. And Marion is a widow, just like Maxim de Winter in Rebecca is a widow. And his wife, Violet, passed away several years ago. Violet's presence lingers in this house. Her memory is idealized. She's painting this glorious picture of Violet that may not necessarily be accurate. The same with Rebecca. You have Rebecca, Maxim de Winter's wife, who is idealized, but is that picture of her that's being painted accurate? So then you have a new woman that comes into these men's life, and they're living in the shadow of these dead wives. But soon out of her bones will grow the new picture of her, more beautiful, more romantic than ever in life, always loving, never angry, never guilty. The dead cannot be answered back. The last word is always theirs. One thing that I noticed in this novel, I said when I read it, again, I haven't read this. I'm pulling this out of the archives. I have not, I think I read this book in 2021. Yes, I read it this summer, June of 2021. And one thing that I noticed while I was reading it was that the author uses a lot of blue and green imagery in this novel, and it was bothering me because I was like, there's a reason for this. It might be need a reread for me to kind of make that click, but I noticed and I knew that there was a reason for it. Elizabeth Taylor is a simple writer. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, right after this point, but she is a deliberate writer. So I knew that this referencing to green and blue had a reason. The light that filtered in was greenish, so that the ceiling had a green pallor, and the marble fireplace reflected green, and the man who leaned his elbow English on the mantelpiece had the same greenish tinge upon his face and hands. Elizabeth Taylor's writing, and after this I'm going to conclude, Elizabeth Taylor's writing can be difficult to describe because it's descriptive, but it's still simple. It's not flowery, but it is evocative. Her writing can be elusive, and her characters can sometimes seem cryptic. This is not my first Elizabeth Taylor that I've read. She gives a reader enough to fill in the blanks. Again, showing and not telling. She's not going to sit here and spell everything out for you, and I personally like that. She's asking some questions. She allows the reader to draw their own conclusions. Again, I don't think this is a bad thing. It makes her reading, I think it makes reading her actually more interesting because even though her novels are short, actually I have all my Elizabeth Taylor novels right here behind this old tea tin, but these are all my Elizabeth Taylor novels. I'm actually missing one. There's one more that I need, but to get my hands on. But her novels are short, and like with this particular format that Virago, there's not, the font's a good size, it's not super tiny. So you still have a lot to unpack in a relatively short novel. And I like that. You get something, especially if you're in the mood to read something quick and not overly complicated, but there's some meat to chew on. Elizabeth Taylor. Especially if you're interested in that 20th century, mid 20th century English fiction. There you go. So even with a short, seemingly simple novel like Elizabeth Taylor's novels, you have quite a lot to unpack, and you may need to read it multiple times to catch things that you missed. She also just writes some beautiful sentences. For example, in the morning, the garden, the house sprang up, jeweled in the bright air. Each leaf, each blade of grass flashed with color. The broken statues of nymphs before the house whitened in the sun. Pomona and Flora, still with wet eye sockets, wet folds of drapery, held out chipped fruit and flowers to dry. Okay, that's good stuff. So this is just a quick little review. I wanted to put this author and this novel out there because I just don't see a lot of people talking about Elizabeth Taylor. I personally need to take my own advice and dive back into her stuff. I also need to dive into Barbara Pym. I think if you're a fan of Jane Eyre, if you're a fan of Rebecca, you will enjoy this because it feels familiar while still doing its own thing. But again, there are differences to still keep you invested. If you haven't read either Jane Eyre or Rebecca, no harm, no foul. It won't detract from the novel. The novel, why do I have to say it like that? It won't detract from, I think, enjoying the novel, but I do feel that being familiar with Jane Eyre at a minimum adds some depth to Palladian. I rated it a 3.5 out of 5. So that means I enjoyed it decently well. That's it. That's all I have to say. Are you familiar with Elizabeth Taylor? Have you read any of her novels? And if you have, what's your favorite? Also, feel free to like, subscribe, go follow me on Instagram, where I give it to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first. And I like to post the occasional goofy reel or a meme in the Instagram stories because I want to. Okay. And with that, I will see you in the next one.